Okay, it says we're live, Karla. I don't know if we trust it or not, but we'll just go with it and see what happens. This
That's
is
right.
stories at Sundown. This is Mac McCullough from Willard Library, and we had a little technical difficulties. So if I seem discombobulated, that's the reason. But here to calm me down, um, get me on the straight and narrow, I have Karla Fales, the Chief Executive Officer of CareWell Services Southwest. That is the Area Agency on Aging 3B for Calhoun and Barry Counties, correct, Karla? Did I get
That
that
is
right?
that is correct.
All right. Well, welcome to the show.
Well,
Welcome to the program.
thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Karla was gracious because I had a little different plan on Thursday, I think it was. I reached out, or Wednesday, I reached out to you. So thanks for stepping in. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem.
So,
Glad to be here.
and we're both outside, so it's a beautiful evening. So, Karla, we met last week, and you told me this story about how you came to be in this work. I just think it's a great story. So,
Oh,
why don't you tell it again?
sure. So I always say I'm a bit of a accidental aging network person because I had been working in the grant world, doing grants management for community action, and had a great colleague I worked with, Angela Wisely, that was my funder when she was at the Calhoun County Senior Millage. And she went to, at that time it was Burnham Brook, went to Burnham Brook trying to revive and save and rejuvenate the facility, the center, and the organization, which was having some challenges at that time, financially and in terms of leadership. And she had called me and just from our conversations and said, I just really need someone to kind of come and run my life. I'm working 1,000,000,000 hours. And I said, I'm a director of grants. What do you got? And she said, all I have is an executive assistant. And I said, well, I've done that before. And she offered me $2,000 more than I was making, which was enough to make my mind up. And so I went over and worked with her and got to know the organization a little bit. And I literally running her life, making sure she was where she needed to be, when she needed to be. And I guess the sort of ironic twist in all that is Angela was actually killed in a car accident about 5 months after I started. And because of the fact I had been doing so much, folks that were taking over and trying to help us through that period of time, folks like Pete Christ and Jim Baldwin and our board, kind of looked for me for some of the information that was needed. And so I got to dig into the work a little bit more and ended up becoming a program manager, doing the area agency on aging work while they were working on just, again, saving the building in the center. And I ended up getting an opportunity to actually go work at the Calhoun County Senior Millage as the manager. And so I took that opportunity, not knowing where things were going to go with Burnham Brook as they turned things around and working with the community foundation. And then about 4 months after I left, the CEO left from Burnham Brook. And so I was asked if I would come back after they transferred the ownership of the building to the Title Holding Corporation, the Community Foundation, and realizing that what was left of the nonprofit was actually the component that was the Area Agency on Aging. And folks didn't really know what that meant. So I had been running that for the couple of years that I had been there from 2005 to 2007. So I came back as the CEO. And I guess kind of to me, the neatest part of that, obviously the tragedy of Angela's death is something that's, stayed with me forever. Still, it's with me all the time.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there's something about experiencing mentors like Angela was to me, just bringing me alongside and saying, you need to know about this, you need to know how to do that. And then after Angela died, I had the privilege of working with folks like Pete Christ, who really challenged me and encouraged me and saw something in me. And even some of the members and volunteers, I remember I told you a story about a gentleman, Roger Gay, that was a volunteer and worked on some of the stuff related to the facility and the building. And after I became the CEO, he sent me just a nice little note saying, you finally found your calling, and you're right where you need to be. And I had never thought of having a calling, or that was it. And he saw that and said, no, I told you this is where you need to be. You're doing what you were meant to be doing. And so it was just kind of neat. I had a grandparent who lived with me for 10 years and never worked in high school because my parents were like, you can't have a job. But I drove seniors around. I mowed lawns for all my neighbors in the trailer park where I lived. And, I'd been working with seniors since that time and never really considered it as a career path. And
Yeah.
so it was just kind of neat to see that, to have those mentors that came alongside and then just really find something that was at a time when I could really embrace the passion of a career and dig into it. And so it's just kind of neat. So yeah, I'm an accidental aging person.
Well, and when he wrote you that note, I mean, did that ring true right away, or how
No.
did you come to find that it was your calling? When was that realization?
I think that took some time, particularly since, when I first came back as the CEO in February 2008, it was like, okay, and I'm pretty task oriented. It was like, okay, well, here's a job. I got stuff to do, and not to mention working a million hours and figuring out if we had enough money to pay people that week. It wasn't till probably sometime later that I had a few other people make some comments to me, and that this you're definitely made for this. And so, I mean, it took some time. And then, when I got into where so much of it was second nature, and it just even the hard days, going to work was something I looked forward to, and working with the seniors was something I looked forward to, and then start seeing that, you kind of making a little bit of a difference. And so, it took, I would say it probably took 3 or 4 years before I kind of went, they might be onto something. And, when I could settle in and really think about it. And so it's been kind of it's been a wild ride, that's for sure. But
Yeah. Well, for folks who aren't as familiar or don't know, I mean, what is CareWell Services? What are the Area Agency on Aging? What's the scope of their mission?
Yeah, and it is a little bit different. We don't have a lot of organizations that are like ours, in that. So through the Old Americans Act, passed in 1965, they created area agencies on aging, but they had to be designated through the state units on aging. So I couldn't just decide tomorrow I want to be the area agency on aging. But you're going to hear my dog in the background.
That's perfect.
So the state unit on aging, which in our case is the Michigan Aging and Adult Services, they actually designate organizations as the area agency on aging, and they can take the designation away, which is what was happening in 2005. Henry, come here.
I think Henry wants to be on camera.
Henry really supports Benny. He just barks. He has no idea why he's barking. So he's just a cheerleader. I'm here for you, dude. You bark, I bark.
Perfect.
I'm guessing my neighbors are doing something. That's usually what happens.
Yeah, and it's not as much of a distraction for anybody else but you. So don't worry about it.
That's right.
And and here's my cousin Emily saying Henry is a star. And
so
folks, you can make comments. So aging. What do they do, and why are they essential?
So our mission is promoting health, independence, and choice, and that really encompasses a lot of what we do. I mean, that's the focus all the way back to the Old Americans Act, is to help promote independence. Our mission has expanded somewhat in that, say aging doesn't happen in a vacuum. Aging persons are generally supported by caregivers. And along with that, there's some commonalities for people who are aging as well as people with disabilities. So the mission of area agencies has expanded. And so now it's really about promoting health, independence, and choice for seniors, persons with disabilities, and caregivers. And that caregivers piece is a big piece of it.
Yeah. And full disclosure, for years working at the newspaper, you'd get calls. I would get calls from older adults looking for help,
Yep.
um, hoping that we could solve it. I just pick up the phone and call you.
Yeah. Yep. And I always say that our most effective strategies are the more organic ones. I have a state legislator who does a lot of canvassing. You can probably figure out who that is. We get a lot of contacts from him because they'd never heard of us. And Kathy Miller from Marshall always says we're the best kept secret in Calhoun County. But, people don't think about the need for our services until they really need them, and then they don't know we're here. We're not got national recognition like an American Red Cross or something like that. So
Yeah, yeah. Well, and nobody likes to think about getting old until they have to, right?
that's right.
And
Yeah.
honestly, no, people don't want to think about their loved ones, their parents getting old until suddenly, there needs to be some help.
Right. And realizing there is help, because one of the unique aspects of area agencies on aging is we don't have income requirements. The Older Americans Act was specifically set up that it was the people who needed assistance. It was not based on income. And so a lot of people will say to me, "Oh, well, I don't qualify for your services." And I'll say, "Well, why do you think that?" And they'll say, "Well, because, I have money." And it's like, no, that's not how it works. Everyone is entitled to get support, encouragement, coaching, information. That's for anyone. We have one program, and then some of our millage programs that have some income requirements, but even those are higher than most people think. And so, that's why I say it is. They even have a group of people called the age resistant. That's a Ken Dykewald reference of, people are purposely within their mind. You're only as the old person is the person who's older than you.
Yeah,
And we see that all the way up into the 80s. I'm not old yet. So, and in some ways, that's a good mindset. We want to resist that process as much as possible by every means we can,
yeah,
which makes my job a little easier too.
yeah, yeah. Although on the other hand, living in a culture in which getting older is something to avoid rather
Yeah.
than something to embrace.
Yeah, that is the unfortunate part. I mean, there's a lot of ageism in that regard. I mean, we see it all the time, and I said I'm the person at every meeting that my hand goes up and says, "What about the old people?" Or this is not very age friendly, but that's part of it's interesting. One of the other aspects of area agencies is that they were to be an advocate and a voice. In fact, one of the first words in the Older Americans Act is to be an advocate for older Americans in the work that we do. And so, that's a big piece of what we do and how we help. And sometimes that's at the local level,
Yeah,
talking to an organization, talking to somebody that might be able to help them, or at the national level, when we talk about just the state and national level, when we talk about the political side of things, of don't forget we have older adults in our community, and they deserve the same respect and dignity as others.
yeah. Well, and you do a lot of advocacy. For years, you printed a lot of op-ed pieces in the local paper um, around various issues. Elder abuse is a huge
Mhm.
issue. Has that gotten any better?
Um, no, it's I think in some ways there's things that stay under the surface, and there's things that will make it pop back up, sort of like a buoy. During the pandemic, it just looked different. We saw, from an APS standpoint, I would say the Adult Protective Services, in some ways they saw an increase in reports because more people were together. But at the other side of it, there were some folks that were probably in a position to be taken advantage of, that they were actually maybe less likely to experience exploitation because the person doing the exploiting can't come see them because they're on lockdown. So, it was just kind of different
Yeah,
stuff. And elder abuse is a broad term. We
yeah,
always say people think of beating up grannies, and it's like that. And I always take that phrase, interesting enough, from a small child that I made a presentation to about elder abuse. Somebody asked me to do that, and I was like, well, here's a different audience. And I did, and I mentioned elder abuse, and if anybody knew what that meant, and this little said, it's beating up grannies, and I'm like, Well, that's one form, but it's actually the exploitation and the lack of care and some
Yeah.
of that we see more often. It's not the Mickey Rooneys.
Right.
It's the Mary Jane with $800 in the bank, but
Yeah. And another issue that we've talked a lot about, and for a while at the library, we were hosting support groups, but supporting caregivers. Um,
yes.
I mean,
Yep.
caregiving is really hard. It's hard to do, and if you need to hire somebody to do it, that's hard
Yeah.
too.
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, and what's interesting is that's probably our a group that is the least resistant to asking for help is our caregivers. There's usually the ones we have to convince to say it's okay. It's okay to let someone else carry that burden. And that's where I see a lot of things that aligned with me coming into this role and this position is, I didn't know my mom was a client of my organization until after I worked there. I didn't know where the person who came and helped them around their house came from until after I worked for them and went, oh, she's a client. But I also remember that both of my parents ended up in Fieldstone following her stroke because the idea of asking for help for my dad was like, no, this is what I said I would do for richer, for sicker, sickness and health. This is what I said I was going to do. I'm providing her care, but that care was so overwhelming because she had a massive stroke that they both ended up in Fieldstone. And fortunately, they received a referral and someone was able to say, it's okay to ask for help. The other part too is there is an element of pride in that people feel that they might be letting their loved one down or letting their own standards down or a commitment that they made. And we have to tell people it's okay to ask for help and it's okay to share the burden sometimes. And the important thing is you do that early enough in the process that you don't get to the point where my parents did, where they had to literally ask for that level of help in order to make it through what they were going through. But it's the caregiving piece too is we're seeing caregivers change. They've changed since I started. My dad was the typical caregiver when I started.
Yeah.
Husband or wife taking care of a spouse or a partner. Probably some women, my age, I was technically a caregiver for my mom and then for my dad.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen that change over the last, I've been here a long time now, 15 years. I'm seeing younger caregivers. I'm seeing more men as caregivers.
Yeah.
I'm seeing multiple generations of caregiving. They've talked about the sandwich generation for a long time, and I'm a perfect sandwich generation. I was raising kids and taking care of my parents.
Yeah.
Now I'm seeing it's like, it's a Marmaduke sandwich. They're taking, particularly within some communities and some of our cultures where you've got, a 60 or 70-year-old that's taking care of their mom who is still alive, but also has a daughter or a child and a grandchild, and they might all be living under the same house or being supported by the single person. And that's, in one way, it's a testament to longevity, but in another way, it speaks volumes in terms of the challenges that folks are having to deal with in the caregiving environment. And like your situation, so many more long distance caregivers. Is how in the heck do you navigate a system in a different state? Where everything's different. And while there's an area agency on aging in every county and any tribal existence within the United States, find them. They're not all called area agencies on aging, just like ours. We're CareWell Services. And they look different in every state. Some are direct care providers. Some are just give out money. Others are way more engaged. So it's like we're all the same, but we're all different. And it's just a huge system to navigate, and people don't always know where to start.
Yeah, it is really hard, and it is different from county to county, and boy, trying to be supportive of older parents while you're a 6-hour drive away, you always feel inadequate.
Yeah.
And I have to say that I've called the area agency on aging in their home county many times, and
Yeah.
they've always been very supportive.
Yeah.
And incidentally, I have been streaming contact information for CareWell Services across the bottom. and it's a great organization to call if you suspect something, if you see something, if you're worried about something, if you don't know where to turn.
Hmm.
Um, Phone number, email, and ask for Karla.
Yeah. Yep.
Um,
You can do that, or the folks that they're going to talk to on the phone, surprisingly, they've probably heard just about everything.
yeah,
And they might provide information and you can go on your way because now you have what you need, or they can help sort of guide you into what's needed a little bit more. Not just our services. That's the one thing about our services. We look at we're responsible for the entire aging network. And so we're supposed to know it, which we try to keep up on. But so we try to direct you to other providers or other services, whether they're paid, free, private pay, to kind of help people be able to navigate it, because everybody has a different approach
yeah,
and different sets of needs.
yeah, absolutely. I wanted to, I should ask, I would be remiss to not ask. I mean, this has been an extraordinary trial for you and your agency and your colleagues in this field. I mean, working
Hmm.
through the pandemic. Talk a little bit about how you had to retool, what did you have to focus on,
Hmm.
and talk a little bit about the dangers of isolation, which are
Hmm.
always severe,
Right.
but
Yeah.
during the pandemic, it's even worse.
Yeah, well, we've kind of coined the phrase that the entire 18 months, the theme word was pivot, because we have pivoted so many times. I'm dizzy.
Yeah,
Obviously, the entire world pivoted on March 16th. So we went home. We weren't technologically prepared for that, and so we had to get our technology up to speed very quickly. We weren't process ready for that, so we had to update some of that. And so initially we really jumped into just identifying what are the needs and where's there a gap. And that's where I said, our missions expanded a little bit, and now we really focus more on vulnerable persons of all ages. We were delivering food. I had staff, I can't say enough about my staff. You talk about amazing people. They were in the middle of the pandemic delivering groceries. We did about $75,000 worth of groceries that we were delivering initially to seniors, but then we expanded it. We couldn't have done that without the NAACP. And the A. Philip Randolph Institute and Adventist Community Services, and some folks from Emmett Township and Burma Center all came along and said, we'll help. And so we were, at that point, you couldn't order shipped. You had to go and shop them. And they were doing that. They were shopping those orders and delivering them. We delivered food boxes. We were doing about, at one point, almost 1,000 boxes a week, in coordination with either RISE or the Calhoun County Faith-Based Organization, or distributing on our own, just trying to keep, food flowing and quite honestly, to keep seniors in their homes. And
yeah,
then we started pivoting to working with isolated people. With the health department, we were part of the Emergency Operations Center and found that, there wasn't a way to get food to COVID people that were isolated. And, like most of us, you wake up sick one day and you don't go, oh, isn't it good that I planned for that 14 days of food and toiletries and toothpaste and toilet paper? And
yeah,
people didn't, and they felt like crap. So we got a United Way grant, and we started doing all sorts of stuff related to buying snacks for the hotel where COVID peoples were, just anything you can imagine. And then I got into PPE business because I had access to PPE from the state level. And when it was hard to find, they asked me if I needed it, and I said yes. And then I'd figure out with my providers or the community who needed it, and worked with the Share Center and the Haven and all sorts of folks to make sure people were getting the PPE they needed out the back door of the Cool Center. Because at that point, I lived in Barry County and had no internet service most of the time. So I had to work in the office alone. That's a scary building, by the way, when nobody's there, especially at 1 a.m. And so, we just pivoted and did that. And then as the vaccinations became available, we started, initially the health department didn't have their online system set up. And so we became the call center, and that same group of staff that had been delivering food, we had a meeting and I said, okay, pivot. And they said, what now? I said, now you get to schedule vaccines. And so they scheduled vaccines and worked the clinics until they got their online system up. And then we pivoted again, and now we're working, still delivering some groceries here or there, distributing clean house kits, And then now we're working with trying to get those vaccine resistance folks to come to the realization that the vaccine is the way out of this mess, and work on that. So, and a lot of those efforts were, one of the other things we added, I should say, was a friendly reassurance program, where we called seniors and just checked in with them and made sure everything was okay on a weekly basis. And we had some volunteers who were willing to do that and to help us with that. So, it was really about just, in the midst of all the craziness and the isolation, is providing a human touch, even if it wasn't an actual touch, whether it was a telephone conversation, handing a mask to somebody, or just, we had a lot of seniors who would call and say, I can't get my incontinence supplies and I am embarrassed to ask anyone.
Yeah.
Who do you ask? You go to your neighbor and say, hey, you can't do that in the middle of a pandemic.
Right.
So, we were handing out incontinence supplies. So it was really about giving respect and dignity and just a voice, if not anything else, on the end of the phone during a time when people were feeling closed in.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I hear you. You always give credit to all the different partners and agencies and individuals that you work with. Clearly, and you may know the stats, but we're clearly getting older as a broader society, and I would say that here locally we're probably older than the average. But are we getting better as a community? Are we getting better as a community in responding to that?
We're not there yet. I think part of it is I think we have people who are listening. We have people that are, saying, hey, we need to have, somebody from the Aging Network at the table. And so, we are getting to that point. I think where we have issues and that we're not addressing them is things like identifying the fact that, older adults financially are having to work longer. So are we adapting jobs? Are we creating jobs that are best designed for older adults, or that capitalize on their strengths and just the amazing life experience they have? How are we doing that? Are we making sure families are equipped? I cannot believe the number of calls I get from folks who say, I can't take time off to care for my mom. And I'm like, you do know we have a FMLA, right? And they're like, well, that doesn't count. Yes, it does. People, those type of things, I think we still have some things we have to work on. What we have here in Calhoun County, though, is just what you referenced, which was the partnerships.
Yeah.
I can't think of a situation where if I encountered something I didn't know, that I couldn't pick up a phone and call someone and would be able to talk to them about it. In fact, I was feeling a little frustrated on Friday because we've had a lot of interesting things, tough things in the last couple of weeks that have challenged us in terms of systems that aren't equipped for this type of stuff or don't work. And I was lamenting a little bit. I was complaining to one of my partners at the Adult Protective Services, and she said, okay, I'm going to stop you right there. And she said, do you realize nobody does what we do in Calhoun County? Nowhere else in Calhoun County can APS, the Area Agency on Aging, Summit Point, Haven, and the hospital all talk. Nowhere else. Every place else she works, that doesn't happen. And so it was just enough of a jar to my sensibilities for me to go, okay, I had my moment. I'm going to move beyond that and be thankful for the amazing systems that we have here, that even when they don't work, we figure out a way around them. Most of the time, we don't have too many that we can't, and I've tried to build a network by where if there's somebody who's falling in a crack, whether they're 60 or not, if they're falling between a crack, part of the reason we have fund balance, part of the reason that we get the grants that we get is so that person, and I'm thinking of a particular one we dealt with that, they don't qualify yet for Summit Point services, but they're still homeless and have no place to sleep tonight.
Yeah.
Well, by law, they can't pay for the services by regulation. Well, then I'm going to pay for them. That type of system, I guess you would call that a safety net. To me, it's a humanity net. That type of humanity net needs to exist in all communities, and we just do it really well here.
Yeah. Yeah. I do want to pivot before we go because you and I were sitting there in Cafe Rica talking about what are we going to talk about, and we had it all figured out. And then Emily Powell stopped by, and you got up and you gave a big hug and reminisced about this play that you were in, and
Yeah.
called The Curious Savage. So why don't you talk a little bit about that and why you
Yeah.
got all emotional just talking about it?
Well, it was one of the first, I got into community theater several years ago. It was just a way to, do something different. When you do a job like I do, sometimes you need some stress relief. And so I started doing community theater, and we did this play in Delton, at Delton Amateur Community Theater, Delton Act. It was called The Curious Savage. And you go through the process of learning the play and doing all that. You don't often think about what the messaging is in the play. And so Emily was in that play with me. She played kind of a ditzy. She thinks she's a glamour girl, but they're all technically housed in a home for people who aren't quite in touch with their own reality.
Yeah.
And my character had a small child that I thought was alive. It was a doll. And it wasn't until I think the dress rehearsal, at the end of the play, the characters all come out, and there's a bunch of characters. But the characters come out at the very end as Mrs. Savage, who was put in this home unjustly so that they could exploit her financially.
Right. Yeah.
All the characters have now changed, and you're seeing the characters as Mrs. Savage sees them in their authentic, real self. You see my character as the loving, compassionate mother that she was before her child died. You see Emily as Emily sees herself, which was glamorous, well put together, thoughtful, kind. You see the musician who carried around the violin as an actual musician. You just saw all the characters as they really were in their true essence. And it hit me in that. I was like, you know what? That's seniors. That's working with older adults. We don't always, we see the current reality, but we don't always realize the experience, the depth, and the essence that's there. That crotchety old man who bitches at you all the time, he might have been a foreman on a railroad that now doesn't have a purpose in life and is just looking for someone to boss around so he can feel good, or a hoarder that has very traumatic experiences that are contributing to this, and you don't know their story. And so it got to me, and it got to Emily, probably because my grandson, who made a cameo as my actual live child, just stared at Emily. And that's when it hit me, because Emily was this goofy, like, things coming out of all over places and lipstick where it didn't belong. And then she comes out at the end and she's gorgeous. Yeah. And Isaac, who at the time was about 2, he'd seen the play 47 times because of rehearsals. He just looked at her, and his eye, see it, I'm choking up again. His eyes just got so big, and he just stared at her for the whole last 5 minutes of the play. And I was like, that's it. So, it just kind of encompassed, I think, maybe what I try to do in treating people with dignity and respect is remember that there's a story there. And if I can find the story, sometimes I can have a better understanding of what the person's going through. Or I might just get to know them and have just the most pleasant experience ever. I got to go to lunch at Culver's with a lady that at 74 was homeless, had never been homeless in her life. And I got to hear her story and realized she'd done some amazing work with children when she was younger. And now her hoarding tendencies had some things to do with the fact that that's who she's caring for. She's caring for her neighbors. She's caring for her cats and everyone else's cats. It just changes your perspective if you can slow your brain down, which is tough with an ADD adult sometimes, and see that. And I guess maybe that's what I want people to see in older adults. I don't want them to see the grumpy lady or the scruffy lady or the person who's not nice to them. I want them to see the essence of that person, like you do in The Curious Savage.
Yeah. And, I just love, I mean, that made the conversation, made the show today, I think, practically. This idea that when you get older, the world tends to marginalize you or pass you by, move too fast. And again, not really seeing the person for who they are and their whole experience.
Yeah, most definitely.
Yeah. So one other question that I had, and we've been scrolling the content. Do you need volunteers? Do you need people that, do you need that kind of help?
We have several programs that rely on volunteers even in the midst of this pandemic. One of them is home delivered meals, which is one of our most critical programs, and especially was during the pandemic. They're all the time looking for people to deliver meals to seniors. And again, that's one of those positions where you may be the only contact or conversation that person has with a person. So that we also have another program for those that want a little bit more mental stimulation, the Medicare Medicaid Assistance Program, that helps people navigate Medicare Medicaid. You want to get people fired up, talk to them about Medicare, because it's a behemoth of a system. And so our volunteers actually help navigate that with them and support them. And so that there's trainings on that coming up. It's great for folks that retired from financial services or worked in different fields where they had to deal a little bit with insurance or instructions, a lot of instructions. So it's a neat program. We will probably be doing it in person, but we do have some of it virtually too. Both of those programs use volunteers and are really significant, very different. One's you're dealing with people's money, and the other one you're dealing with their food. They're as passionate about both of those things, and so it's a great opportunity for folks.
Okay, and people can call you right at that number.
Mm-hmm.
Karla, thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah.
I love the work that you do. I love how you show up in the community, and thank you for always supporting me. And there's Henry, I take
No,
it.
this one's Benny.
Benny, sorry.
Yes.
Sorry, Benny.
He's the jealous one.
He's the jealous one.
He doesn't like your talking to me.
All right. Well, you have a great evening. And viewers, you have a great evening too. Next week, we have a treat. Tiara Gray, who is a local artist, works down at Cafe Rica too. I get to meet a lot of people at Cafe Rica. But we're going to talk to her about her art and her commitment to her hometown. And I'm really looking forward to that. So with that, everybody enjoy the rest of your evening and take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Sorry about that.